Hey everyone, welcome to the show. I'm here today with Denise Yu. Denise, thank you for being here, and how are you?
I am good. I am as good as one can be in month 13 of a global pandemic. But I'm good. How are you,
Yeah,
Angie?
I'm great, thank you. I'm also as good as can be in month 13. So a little introduction to Denise. Denise, you've had an interesting previous life and career experience. You've got 2 bachelor's degrees and a master's, but not in computing. You then go to boot camp and you have 2 full stack roles at interesting companies, Third Space Learning and Merger Market. Then you, I guess, begin to discover your passion, what you like. You move on to a role at Pivotal Labs where you hit senior, and you're now a senior software engineer at Github, which is awesome. So well done. We're going to be talking about your journey to senior and find out what you can tell us, I guess.
Sounds good.
Cool. So, firstly, why go to boot camp?
That's a really great question, and one that I still get asked pretty frequently by people who are kind of figuring out how to break into the industry today. For me personally, the reason why I chose to go to boot camp is because I know that I have terrible self-discipline. I cannot focus on a thing for enough time to get proficient at it. So I knew that if I didn't enroll myself in a structured program and surround myself with other people who are trying to do the same thing, the odds of me learning enough coding skills to become a software engineer were extremely low. So, like, very personally for me, I did it because I needed the environment to focus. A lot of people don't necessarily need that. There are plenty of success stories of people who are self-taught by using free resources like Free Code Camp. Today, like, there's way more resources online, like open source, readily available than there were when I was learning to code. So I think the self-taught path is definitely viable if you have that, personal discipline and drive to do it. For me, I just knew that I didn't. I would not have made the career switch if I didn't put myself into that environment, give myself like a 12-week, dedicated time to get up to speed.
I'm with you on that one all the way. So then, your motivation was to pick up coding skills to go into work as a developer, or for other reasons?
Well, at the time, I actually wasn't sure. I went to boot camp in London when I had 4 months left on my student visa. Actually, I had just finished my master's in the UK, and at the time, they gave everyone an extra 4 or 5 months at the end of graduation. The idea being like you could use that time to find a job or whatever it was. I decided to use that time to go to boot camp. Um, I think I went into it not necessarily intending to career switch entirely. The reason why I decided to go to boot camp was because the whole year when I was at graduate school, I met a bunch of people who were in the startup space. One of my really good friends loved going to startup events like incubator, networking events, and that sort of thing. And I just kind of went along for fun. I met a lot of software developers in that process and thought that software engineering was just a cool thing to know how to do because I went to so many hackathons and saw people just take an idea from nothing to a prototype that was like working well enough at the end of 24 48 hours. And I was like, this feels like a skill that would be good to have regardless of what I do afterward. I think I was still hoping to work in policy or law at some point, but I thought that maybe having a technical skill set could open doors for me to do something more interesting in the intersection of those two fields.
Looking back to your time at boot camp, did you go into it with any reservations? And then did you think, oh yeah, I'm going to be great at this? And did you find coding easy?
I went into it with very low expectations for myself, actually, because I wasn't banking everything on a career switch. If I had gone to boot camp and realized that I was terrible at coding or it just didn't click for me, my backup plan was to go back to the States and look for a job in policy research. That was sort of my plan all along. And realizing that coding was really fun and I was pretty good at it changed things a little bit for me. It wasn't easy though, like just because I think that I did pretty well on the course in the sense that I made it through. I had a job offer pretty shortly after graduation, and I had a couple of projects that I was pretty proud of at the end of the course. But it definitely wasn't easy. Like there were definitely like many nights that I was in front of my computer until 11, 12, 1 a.m. A lot of tear-filled nights, a lot of nights filled with like immense self-doubt, confusion, self-pity, alcohol. Like my cohort was, we hung out at the pub around the corner a lot, probably too much. um,
Mhm.
We really bonded over that, though. Not like, well, partly the part, but we bonded over the fact that the course was hard for everyone. I think a lot of people had come to the course with previous careers under their belts, and they had done really well in those careers, and so they kind of, I didn't have a fully fledged career before going onto the course, but a lot of people were like, I have 10 years in marketing. I know I'm smart. I know I'm like capable. Why is this so hard? And that kind of, that self-perception as someone who can get things done and who's capable was really tested, I think, by 12 weeks on this course. It was definitely very, very challenging at many times.
If we move on to your promotion to senior, where does I have a lot to ask, but I'm just going to throw the gates wide open here. Where does the story start?
That is a really great question. So I got promoted to senior engineer after working at Pivotal for almost 2.5 years, almost close to 3 years. But I was close to being in year 5 of working in the industry overall when that promotion happened for me. It happens sooner for some people, happens later for other people. I don't think that there's any right or wrong length of time in industry before you get promoted or before you should start expecting that promotion. I think the thing that started getting me to ask the question of, am I, like, maybe I should be pushing for this promotion. So, like, one thing that's true about me, and I think is true about a lot of people who come into tech from a non-traditional background, is you kind of are always grateful for what you have. You're always like, wow, I never even expected to be here. I'm so grateful to even be given this job, to even like be given this opportunity. I'll take whatever I can get. And so many people have that attitude. So I think, I don't know what it is about people with non-traditional backgrounds, but a lot of the times, like, we don't really learn to advocate for ourselves until quite late, until relatively late in the game. I know that I still I'm pretty bad at negotiating like salaries. I'm pretty bad at pushing for things that that I probably deserve sooner. So I didn't really start asking the question until I'd been at Pivotal for a couple of years. And the thing that started prompting me to start pushing was watching a lot of my peers get that promotion. Like a lot of people who had been in the industry for a similar length of time to me. One kind of turning point was I was working, one of my friends at Pivotal, also a bootcamp grad, one day was promoted to senior in the normal promotion cycles. And we were having, I had lunch with him pretty much every day. And he was like, well, I got promoted to senior engineer and I have no idea why. I was like, what do you mean you have no idea why? Like, there must be a good reason. And he was like, well, I've just been doing the thing that I've always been doing. And I have zero idea why they promoted me and not you, for example. And I was like, what do you mean? He was like, well, I think that you work a lot harder. I think that your work is a lot more visible than me. Like, you're going and speaking at conferences. I don't do any of that stuff. Like, I just show up to work and I do what I'm told, and I somehow got promoted. And I was like, well, at first I was like, no, he's just underselling himself. Like, he must be doing something right. But then I kind of thought about that for a long time. And I was like, yeah, like, I am working really hard. Like, I have gotten a bit of technical leadership under my belt. I've switched disciplines. I was, temporarily a product manager when we needed that backfill and we didn't have anyone to do that job. I did that job for 6 months in that office. And I was like, why am I not getting the recognition? And up until that point, I think I told myself, oh, they're going to promote us boot campers when we've been around for 6 or 7 years. But this person hadn't been around for 6 or 7 years. He was in exactly the same place as me industry-wise. And I had actually worked in more companies and arguably had, more diverse experiences up to that point. So that's the thing that kind of got me pushing. But I also am a little bit disappointed that I waited until that point, because I think it's healthy, even if you don't think you're ready for the promotion to the next level, I think you should always be having that conversation with your manager. And that's something that took me way too long to learn. I didn't really view my manager as a direct resource, I guess, for my career development, which sounds really stupid in retrospect. But at Pivotal, we had matrix style management, which means that our managers were not on the same team as us typically. And they also were kind of part-time ICs. And I basically just didn't know how to interact with my manager and it was also the first company I worked at where I actually had a manager who wasn't the VP of engineering, because the other jobs that I worked were really, really small and I didn't stay at them for very long. So I think my first problem was that I didn't know what my manager was supposed to be there for. And And that's something like no one really tells you that. When you go into your first job, no one really sits you down and is like, here's how you manage your manager. Like, your manager is a resource. Here's how you
Mm.
kind of extract value out of them, is probably the most cynical way to put it. But it is literally their job to be there for you, to make sure that you have what you need to grow in your career. I didn't know that. So I never pushed on that until I saw other people successfully getting the things that I now realize, like, oh, I want that too. um, so I guess like I started
Mm.
having the conversation around what does it mean to be a senior level engineer way later than I should have had that conversation. I didn't really start thinking about it until like year 4 of being in the industry. I think I should have started thinking about it in year 2 or
Mm.
3, honestly. I think everyone should start thinking about it
Mm-hmm.
after their first year. If I'm like, I don't think that you should expect to be promoted to senior after a year in the industry, but I think starting to think about what that means within your company, within your engineering context, will 100% like make you prepared for that conversation when you're ready to have it for real.
I really love that little phrase you use, learning how to manage your manager. You know,
Absolutely. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, when I think back to my managers, I think the primary role that sticks out is in my mind is them getting me raises and promotions. You
Hmm.
know, but then to an extent, I guess the boot camp, we both went to the same boot camp at different times. I think you were like about a year or half a year before me or something. Um, I guess the boot camp, their job was to get us our first job. Their job wasn't to prepare us for career progression.
Preparing someone for their first job is a very fundamentally different challenge than preparing someone for getting from mid-level to senior or senior to staff. I think it is asking a little bit of much of boot camps to expect them to provide you career support forever. I think within first year or two, fine. There are a lot of open questions that come up during the first year or two that it really helps to have a community to fall back on. But I think once you've been in the industry for a couple of years, one thing I always encourage people to do is like build a network. Start building a network, whatever that means to you, right? Do whatever is comfortable. If you're the kind of person that likes to go to meetups, go to meetups. Like, just keep going to them. Pick a few that you like. Start making friends at those meetups. Um, Build a community of support that's independent from your job, so that when you need to get a new job, or even if you're just curious, if you're ever wondering about things like, am I underpaid, am I under leveled at my current job, like having a community of people who are not within your company is really, really critical for that. Like having a trusted group of people that you can go to. But I think like a couple of years out of boot camp, that's on you. I think you got to develop your own community. That is part of, I think, thriving in this industry, is you got to get out there and you got to meet people.
Going back to that point, you've had that conversation with your coworker, and then you've had some time to reflect on it, and you decide you need to be getting these promotions as well. Do you then form a career plan? What's your strategy then at that point?
I think
Did you have one?
no, I didn't really have a strategy, to be honest. I started having conversations with my managers around like, okay, what does it mean for me to, what does it mean for me to be promoted? How do I get to that level? A lot of the answers I got were around technical leadership. They had at Pivotal, we had this role called an anchor on each team, which is kind of the same thing as being the tech lead on a team. You were less, because we rotated between teams pretty often. The idea was that the anchor was the engineer who didn't rotate as often to sort of like maintain technical context on the project. So one of the things that I kept being told was like, oh, you need to go anchor a project. And I was like, okay, cool, I'll do that. Unfortunately, like there are only so many projects running at any point in the office, and most of them already had people who were anchoring. So I was like, okay, well, it seems like I want to do this technical leadership stuff, but right now there are no spots. Like I can't do this thing that doesn't exist. So what else can I do? And I got other answers like, oh, like be a technical resource for other people in the office, be the person that can ramp up on any team, just show that you're really, really good at ramping up on different projects. I think one strategic mistake I made early career was spending too much time on doing very visible but non-technical work. Like when I worked in the London office, I was the go-to person in the office for anything related to diversity and inclusion. Like literally, if anybody was like, "Oh, this person wants to host an event at Pivotal, and they come from this like women in tech nonprofit or something. Denise, do you want to handle this?" And I was like, "I'm a random engineer. Like, why is this coming to me?" After a while, of course, the first 9 times that someone asked me of that, I said yes. And so I was like, oh, logically. So like the 10th time that they would also expect me to say yes. So my brand in the office became engineer who is willing to drop everything and go do anything related to community or D&I or whatever. Which, like, by the way, I love doing. Like, I had so much fun doing that. And when I talk about network building, like that 100% is a way that you can build your own network. So on a personal level, I don't regret the time that I spent doing that kind of work. I made a ton of really great friends. I, had a great community who helped me out much later on when I, needed to job hop. But in terms of making the leap from non-senior to senior, so like it could be the actual levels depend on your company, but sometimes it'll be like junior engineer, mid-level engineer, or just engineer, whatever it is before senior. One piece of advice I would definitely give here is that if you are not a senior engineer yet, just be very, very judicious of the time that you spend on non-engineering work, especially if you are anyone with at least one minority identity. The reason is because that will become your brand faster than you want it to be. I guarantee you this. Like, if you become the person that hosts a single D&I panel, you're forever that person. And again, like, it might be a lot of fun for you, just like it was for me. But when it comes to those hard conversations around promotion time, there is a non-zero chance. There's actually a quite high chance that you're going to get feedback around spending too much time on extracurricular activities and not enough time on visible engineering work, even if you did do the engineering work. Because people, like, this is the way that people's memories work. People remember the super visible things, and people give feedback on those things because it is really easy to write a piece of feedback saying, Denise organized this D&I event. So many women came to our office, learned about this event. It was so great. We got this many leads. She's awesome. But like, running D&I events doesn't appear in the criteria for being a senior engineer. Like, that is in no job description. That is in no career ladder at any company. Maybe it's like a sum now at some of the more enlightened ones, but that generally is not one of the criteria for getting promoted to senior engineer. So if you're spending even like 5-10% of your time doing that kind of work, people see that and people latch onto that. If you spend the other 90 or 95% of the work doing technical work, actually doing the things that are in your job description, that like tends to get forgotten, unfortunately. Like, the number of times I ask people to write technical feedback, that's really hard to write. If you ever like try, like, for anyone listening to this, like one thought experiment you can try, or it's not even a thought experiment, it's an actual experiment. Ask your colleagues for a piece of technical feedback. It's incredibly hard to gather meaningful feedback and also to give feedback on this, because you have to think about really specific examples, and we tend to forget things like that. But it's super easy to remember, oh, this person ran a panel that night. There was great pizza, So unfortunately, that's kind of like, I think, a psychological bias that we can't really screen out of ourselves. So my advice is to, play defense for the first couple years of your career if you're interested in that promotion to senior engineer. Play defense and just be very, very selective about the non-technical work that you do. And like, notice I'm not saying don't do it. I took the policy of not doing it for a while, and I actually found that that made my job less fun because it turns out that doing a little bit of that D&I work was what made work fundamentally joyful for me. That was how I found my people. That was how I built a lot of my sense of enjoyment and fulfillment from turning up to work. So just don't overdo it and be selective about what it is you do, so that however you choose to spend that, give yourself a budget, like 5% of your time, 10% of your time. Make that 5%, 10% count and make it feel fulfilling, but make sure that you're still spending the vast majority of your time on technical work.
If I say the name Tanya Riley to you, I'm sure that'll immediately ring. So she's written about glue work, and you've contributed to her work as well with some of your sketches, which are pretty cool, and people might be able to discover those. But if anyone's going through the experiences you're describing, she does a fairly good job, I think, of of outlining how to push back against that or how to make it work for you, right?
Yeah, absolutely. The talk being referenced here is Being Glue by Tanya Riley. If you haven't watched it, I highly, highly recommend. It's only like 25, 30 minutes long. It can be found on probably YouTube, probably like a number of different places. But yeah, like you said, really, really great talk, breaking down exactly what it means to do this type of work.
You mentioned self-advocating. Now, when I've known you for several years now, and you always come across as a really confident and intelligent person, always very calm. And I look at your career from the outside, I'm like, oh my God, she's doing so well. She's had these amazing jobs, and oh my God, now she's a senior at GitHub. How the hell does Denise do it? But I guess the truth is, it's not really like that.
I wish I could say that I just cruised here, but like that's not true either. Like I had to fight really, really hard for my senior title in my last job. Fortunately, I got hired in at the senior level at GitHub, so I didn't have to do that again. But it was hard. Like I had to learn the hard way that sometimes you can't just do the thing, right? Like, and by the thing, I mean, you can't just do an engineering task or a project. You have to make sure that people know that you did it. You have to make sure that you can speak about exactly what your role was in that project. And you have to make sure that that work turns up in writing at the critical points in time in your career. Most of those points will be promotion packets, right? Like annual review, semi-annual review, promotion time. So the mistake that I made for a long time was thinking, oh, I did a good job on that thing. That'll speak for itself. Like, I don't have to do anything else. Like the fact that I shipped that thing, I was awesome. Everyone knows that I did that work, job done. That's not really true. So if you want to, I think like for some people that works. Some people do like have their managers watching out for them. Some people do have their peers watching out for them. And, that strategy works. For a lot of other people, that's not true. For a lot of other people, you have to do the thing, you have to document it, you have to make sure your managers know, you have to make sure that your peers know to give feedback to your manager about the fact that you did the work. And you got to make sure that you know what's going into your promotion packet and that the promotion packet is being written sometimes. It's a lot of extra work. And I kind of talked about like managing your manager earlier. This is exactly the kind of work that I mean by that. So you sometimes do have to, the analogy like, teach a man to fish or something. I don't know. But a long time ago, someone actually explained to me, like this is in a totally different context. In the context of like writing technical documentation, they were like, don't teach the user how to fish. Give the user the fish. Just like, give me the fish. So it's the same thing. Don't be like, oh, the watering hole is over there. Like you'll find the evidence over there. Just like be like, here's the fish. I caught the fish. Now you go do the thing with it.
Yeah, you've almost got to give them all of the material they need to advocate on your behalf, right?
Yeah, exactly. You make life as easy as possible for your manager. Don't let your manager, don't make your manager go scrounging around for data and facts on your behalf. Like, have all of those things at the ready. Give those things to your manager.
Getting and giving feedback is something you've actually written about on your own website. I don't think I could do it justice. Maybe you can explain some of the key points that you talk about.
Yeah, I think it's a muscle that a lot of engineers don't really develop, and I think that's to our own detriment. Because I think learning to ask for and to give meaningful feedback to one of your peers is one of the kind of like secret superpowers of this industry, honestly. So there's a lot of different ways. I'll sort of talk about like the how and the why of feedback, and like I'll try to bundle into that like a discussion of why this is a skill worth learning. So in terms of like how to give feedback, I think that's the first barrier for a lot of people. A lot of people are just like, I don't know what good feedback looks like. I don't want to learn this, wasting my time, which I think is a shame. Pivotal had a really strong peer feedback model, culture rather. And I think a lot of my own experiences are shaped by my time there, which I'm super, super grateful that I got to spend, kind of like the formative years of my software engineering career at a place that emphasized peer feedback so strongly. So one of Pivotal's like fundamental company values was kindness. And an important distinction between being kind and being nice is that kindness is motivated by a desire for everyone to improve. And it also comes from a place of compassion and caring. Being nice means just trying never to hurt another person's feelings. But I think like kindness sometimes means that if you have difficult feedback, you still give the feedback and you sort of absorb the risk that you might hurt someone's feelings in the short term, but this will be good for them and for your relationship in the longer term. So one of the models that we used for giving feedback that I think was a really good model for promoting, I guess, like candidness, candor, and objectivity and kindness in our feedback was called TASK, TASK. It stands for timely, actionable, specific, and kind. The idea being that if you have an interaction with another person and you want to give them feedback related to that, you should give it right away. Like it should be timely. It should be as close as possible to the time that something happened. Of course, if it was a heated incident, you can wait a day or two, for the emotional cool down. But generally, the sooner you can give feedback, the better it is, because the sooner that person learns, has time to digest it, and can change their behavior. When we say that feedback should be actionable, it means that there should be something obvious that they can change about what they were doing before. So like framing holding yourself accountable to your feedback being actionable actually cuts out a lot of the harmful feedback, I think, that I've seen. But I've seen people receive. So one example is people giving, so this happens pretty often. People tell women that they're too assertive, right? Or they're too pushy. But that's not actionable.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what do you concretely change if you're told that you're too pushy? Right? Like, what does that mean? Be less pushy, but like, who's to judge what pushiness is? So I think if you hold yourself accountable to whatever feedback I give to someone, it has to be actionable. So a better, I'm not going to use the pushiness example because I think communication feedback is just a loaded area. But say I'm pair programming with someone and they keep grabbing the keyboard. They might be unaware of that, but one thing that's very actionable that I could say is hey, maybe we can come up with a strategy for, to make sure that we're sharing the keyboard 50-50. Maybe we can use a timer or something, or make sure that we're swapping between I write a test, you write a test, some strategy like that. And the third letter of task is specific. So feedback that is specific means that it references, a specific series of events that happen, which also cuts out the vague, you're too arrogant. It cuts out that kind of harmful feedback as well. And of course, kindness is the last thing. So don't be, but do give the feedback, even if it might be uncomfortable, as long as it comes from a place of caring about the other person and wanting them to do well. So that's sort of the how. That's the mechanics of giving feedback that I try to hold myself to when I'm thinking about peer feedback, or sort of training other people on how to do peer feedback today. In terms of why you should care about this, I think that companies that don't have feedback built into the culture have a harder time of cultivating psychological safety. There's a lot of Business Insider and Harvard Business Review research around why psychological safety is good for companies. And I'm not an expert in it, so I'll just kind of leave that there for maybe your show notes or something if you want to send listeners to, peer-reviewed stuff on that. But at the individual level, I think building trust in your peers on a day-to-day basis, it's like it's like any other kind of exercise, right? If you're doing 10 push-ups a day, then going to CrossFit or whatever, is not going to kill you the way that if you just turn up. So I think I really believe in making peer-to-peer feedback normal and doing it regularly, so that when the big events come up, like promotion time or 360 reviews, or if something really bad happens, right? If you really have a negative interaction with somebody and you feel like your relationship is so bad that you can't work with that person anymore, wouldn't you rather already be in a context where giving feedback is normal, so that it's a lot less scary to open that conversation than if you were the first person in the whole company to ever have to give someone feedback, right? That would be so scary. I don't think I would give feedback in that case. And I was in many situations when I worked at Pivotal where, I didn't see eye to eye with the person that I was pairing with, but because we we were always encouraged to give each other feedback by our managers, I kind of was like, okay, 9 times out of 10, those resulted in some really great heart-to-heart conversations where I just realized, oh, there's like something going on in this person's life that I didn't understand, or there was something about maybe I was doing something annoying and I didn't know that either. So those became really valuable conversations that I think like made us better at working together. It made me definitely more empathetic over time, and I think it made us a better team.
Going back ever so slightly, did you succeed in your very first attempt to become a senior, or were there any failures on the way?
Oh yeah, bunch. I did not succeed on the first try. I asked for the promotion a couple of times. I think 3 times before they finally relented and gave it to me. I kept getting feedback that I didn't have enough technical leadership under my belt. And I kept trying to, I think I was approaching it wrong. At the time, I was speaking at a lot of conferences and building a lot of visibility outside of the company. And I had kind of talked myself into this corner and thought like, oh, if I have all this, if I'm like creating all this external impact, then I should be a senior developer here because I'm doing like keynote talks at conferences, and even the people who are senior developers here are not doing that. Turns out that's not a good angle to approach things from, because when you try to appeal to that's like a power play, which like in retrospect, I didn't realize it was, but it was. Because that's kind of like you trying to leverage your external credibility for something internal, but like external and internal are different spheres. Sometimes like, I don't know, your management chain or your company can choose to recognize you based on something you've done externally, but they don't have to. And that's what I, took a while to figure out. I kind of thought that, oh, like I've done all this stuff externally, I should definitely be at this level, but that's not really how it works. It's at the discretion, like the system you're working within is like your internal system. That's like your management chain. It's up to their discretion whether the outside stuff counts or not. So you got to focus on like optimizing within the parameters of your own engineering ladder and within your own company before you bring in stuff from the outside.
And would you agree if I said it's easier to get the role you want at another company for more money than it is to go for the promotion internally?
Yeah, probably.
And I
Yeah,
mean, that's quite an unfortunate position to be in, right?
I think so. Yeah, I think a lot of companies are still figuring out how to properly recognize employees that decide to stay and to build incentive structures. I think it's a really hard problem to crack. I definitely don't have solutions today, but unfortunately, like the time when people are the easiest time to get your credentials and your salary rounded up is when you're going for a new job. I don't know, just like I've seen that happen over and over and over again. If you really love the company that you're at, maybe you can fight for, getting the right recognition and getting the right title if you feel like you're not at the right level currently. But depending on the context, like sometimes when people come to me for advice about, maybe sometimes people are frustrated that they haven't been promoted in like years and years. Sometimes the right move is to move on, go to a different company. Besides like rage quitting, which can be very satisfying, but I don't think that in itself should be a reason to move on unless you have it really, really bad. I think there's intrinsic benefit of just moving around though. Like if people are like, oh, I've been here 3 years, should I go? I'm like, yeah, you should go. Like if you leave on good terms with your company, I mean, if your company is like denying you promotions for 5 years, maybe it's hard to leave on good terms, but like generally if you leave on good terms with the company, I think enlightened companies will welcome you back after a couple of years. And it's in their interest to want you back because you'll have gone out into the world, learned different development practices, maybe seen what good looks like elsewhere, and you can bring that back. So I think companies are, I don't know, I think the ones that try to retain their employees through like intimidation or whatever, I think, or punish people for wanting to job hop or like getting competing offers, I think those are the ones that are kind of living in the dark ages. I think like if you really build such a great workplace with good incentives for your employees, you shouldn't be threatened by people wanting to go see something else, and leave the door open for them to come back.
I kind of know the answer to my next question. Do you get imposter syndrome, which I assume you do. How have you sort of analyzed your own imposter syndrome, and how do you keep it from sort of holding you back?
That's a really interesting one. So, of course, I get imposter syndrome. I think everyone gets imposter syndrome at least some of the time. But my thinking on imposter syndrome has actually changed in the last few years. So one of my friends in London did a talk a few years ago about imposter syndrome, and she actually comes from like a sociology background, and she made a really interesting, and this was like years and years ago before people were really like figuring out different ways to reframe imposter syndrome. So this is the first time I'd heard this reframing. And she said, if you are chronically suffering imposter syndrome, consider there might be something in your environment that's making you feel less than. Like, maybe it's not all coming from inside your head, right? Like, maybe the reason you feel like you belong is because there are cues in your environment. There are other people around you, like, subtly telling you that you don't belong. And that is a problem that we can actually fix. Like, we can change people's behavior. We can hold people accountable to inclusion. We can do all kinds of different interventions if we accept that some of the things that cause imposter syndrome are actually external.
What's next for you? Staff engineer, principal, CTO, CEO, founder? Where are you going?
I don't know, man. I think by default, a lot of people in my position are kind of like looking at the staff engineer track. I don't really know. I think I got to sit down and have like a heart to heart with myself about what I want next out of this industry. I'm also just really tired. Maybe I need to take a break soon. Yeah, just like, it's a grind. Like, some days are super, super fun. Some days I'm like, oh, I can't believe I'm doing this. But other weeks I'm like, oh, I have to get out of bed, really. So I don't know, maybe engineering management, but I need to look more seriously at that first and like actually get an offer to do something like that. Because you typically have to interview. Like staff engineer, you just kind of like stay on the IC track, and eventually you push your manager to put together a promotion packet for you, and then that's that.
I think I see a great career for you as a podcast guest, appearing on my podcast very, very frequently.
Being a full-time podcast. I wish that paid as well as being a software engineer.
Yeah, no, I'm afraid it doesn't. Thank you so much for your time, and that this has been a really amazing conversation. And I honestly hope you do come back very soon. I think there's so much more depth and so many more questions that we could cover.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks so much for having me on.
My pleasure. Now, before I let you go, I need the joke of the show.
TCP protocol, unlike UDP protocol, involves like a lot of handshakes and makes sure that you receive the information. UDP is kind of like just like scatter out, and then whatever bytes land, that's fine. So there's like, use it for video streaming. So the TCP joke goes, okay, Sanjay, I'm going to tell you a joke about TCP.
All right.
Are you ready for a joke about TCP?
I'm so ready.
Okay, here's the joke about TCP. Did you receive the joke about TCP?
I didn't. I think our protocols are mismatched here.
It's also really stupid and not really a joke.
Thank you, Denise. That's a wonderful end. That's a wonderfully lame end. Exactly how I like it.
Great. Happy to help.
And that's all, folks. Thanks a lot for tuning in. For more info, for questions, comments, or feedback, please head on over to aheadintech.com, and don't forget to subscribe.